Sometimes the person you refuse to trust is the only person who can save your life. The morning rush outside St. Matthew Regional Medical Center moved with the familiar rhythm of a busy American city. Ambulances rolled toward the emergency entrance with lights flashing but sirens silent. Nurses hurried through the automatic doors carrying coffee and patient charts. Families waited anxiously near the entrance, and physicians crossed the parking lot with determined expressions as another demanding day began. Every second mattered inside the hospital, where operating rooms had already been prepared for multiple procedures scheduled before noon. Among the doctors walking briskly toward the entrance was Dr. Marcus Bennett, a respected black cardiovascular surgeon whose reputation for remaining calm under impossible pressure had earned the admiration of colleagues across the state. Dressed in navy blue surgical scrubs beneath a neatly pressed white physician's coat, with his identification badge clearly displayed and a leather medical case in one hand, Marcus checked the time on his watch and quietly increased his pace. In exactly 90 seconds, he was expected in operating room 3 to begin an emergency heart procedure for a young patient whose condition had deteriorated overnight. The surgical team was already scrubbed in, anesthesia had completed its preparations, and every passing moment narrowed the patient's chances of a smooth recovery. Just as Marcus stepped onto the hospital sidewalk leading toward the emergency entrance, Officer Ethan Walker moved directly into his path. Ethan, a white police officer assigned to a community patrol near the medical district, had spent years believing that confidence and quick decisions kept people safe. His uniform was immaculate, his posture unwavering, and his expression carried the certainty of someone accustomed to being obeyed. He raised one hand calmly but firmly. "Sir, I need you to stop for a moment." Marcus slowed immediately without showing frustration. "Officer, I'm due an emergency surgery right now. My team is waiting." Ethan's eyes briefly scanned Marcus from head to toe before focusing on the medical case. "I'm going to need to verify who you are before you enter." Marcus offered a polite nod, keeping his voice steady despite another glance at his watch. "Of course, my hospital identification is right here, but every minute counts." A patient is already in the operating room. Nearby nurses exchanged uncertain looks as they recognized the surgeon. One resident physician quietly whispered to another that Dr. Bennett was leading the morning's critical operation, but Ethan remained focused on his own process. He accepted the identification card, studying it longer than necessary, while Marcus stood patiently, without raising his voice. Around them, the steady flow of hospital staff continued, although more people began slowing their pace as they sensed the unusual delay. Marcus never attempted to step around the officer. Instead, he waited with remarkable composure, maintaining respectful eye contact. "Officer," he said softly, "there are moments when delaying someone creates consequences we cannot see yet. Please, verify whatever you need as quickly as possible." Ethan barely reacted. "If everything checks out, you'll be on your way." Marcus looked once more toward the emergency entrance where members of his surgical team had begun appearing through the glass doors, searching the sidewalk with growing concern. One nurse raised a hand, hoping to get Ethan's attention, but Marcus subtly motioned for her to remain calm. His expression showed neither anger nor fear, only quiet urgency born from years of placing patients before himself. The hospital clock above the entrance changed by another minute. Somewhere beyond those walls, an operating room remained ready while an unconscious patient continued waiting for the surgeon who had not yet been allowed to walk through the door. And neither man standing on that sidewalk realized that before the next hour ended, both of their lives would be connected in a way neither of them could possibly imagine. Officer Ethan Walker handed the identification badge back only halfway before pulling it toward himself again, studying every line with growing skepticism instead of growing confidence. "Dr. Marcus Bennett," he read, aloud slowly, comparing the photograph to the man standing before him. "This says you are a cardiovascular surgeon." Marcus nodded once. "That is correct." Ethan looked toward the hospital entrance and then back to the identification card. "Do you have another form of identification?" Marcus reached carefully into the pocket of his white coat and produced his driver's license without hesitation. "You are welcome to verify everything, officer. I only ask that you do it as quickly as possible. My patient cannot afford unnecessary delays." Ethan accepted the license but remained unconvinced. Years of policing had taught him never to rush a decision, and in his mind caution always outweighed inconvenience. He stepped a few feet aside to radio dispatch for verification, while Marcus remained exactly where he had been instructed to stand. Inside the hospital, the surgical clock continued moving forward. Through the glass entrance doors, 2 nurses and a surgical resident appeared again, scanning the sidewalk with visible concern. One of the nurses finally approached. "Officer, Dr. Bennett is expected in operating room 3 immediately. The patient is already under anesthesia." Ethan politely raised one hand before she could continue. "Ma'am, I appreciate that, but I need to complete my verification first." The nurse looked toward Marcus, hoping he would say something stronger, but he simply gave her a reassuring expression. "Please return inside," Marcus said calmly. "Make sure everything is ready. I will join you as soon as I can." She hesitated before quietly walking back through the automatic doors. Ethan noticed Marcus checking his watch again. "You seem nervous," he observed. Marcus answered without changing his tone. "Not for myself. Someone inside that building is depending on every minute we lose out here." Around them, more hospital employees had begun noticing the unusual scene. Several recognized Marcus immediately. A respiratory therapist whispered his name to another employee. A hospital administrator walking toward the entrance slowed his pace after recognizing the surgeon, but before he could speak, Marcus gave a subtle shake of his head, silently, asking everyone to remain respectful and avoid escalating the situation. Ethan finished his radio call but received only a routine response that additional confirmation would take a few more minutes because of a temporary system delay. He slipped the identification cards into his notebook instead of returning them. "Until everything is confirmed, I need you to remain here." Marcus drew a slow breath, keeping his composure despite the growing urgency reflected in every glance toward the hospital entrance. "Officer Walker, I understand the importance of your responsibilities. I respect them, but there are moments when procedure and judgment have to work together. A hospital is one of those places." Ethan folded his arms. "Procedure exists for a reason." Marcus met his eyes with remarkable calm. "So does trust." The words hung quietly between them as another physician hurried out of the entrance carrying a clipboard. He stopped only a few yards away, looking from Marcus to Ethan with unmistakable concern before speaking carefully. "Dr. Bennett, the operating room is calling again." Marcus offered a faint, reassuring smile. "Tell them I am still coming." The physician disappeared back inside, and the heavy glass doors closed once more. The digital clock above the emergency entrance advanced another minute. And although the morning sun continued shining across the hospital campus exactly as before, the invisible cost of every passing second grew heavier than anyone standing on that sidewalk was yet able to understand. The radio on Officer Ethan Walker's shoulder crackled again, but this time the response brought him little more than confirmation that the identity verification system was still processing requests from several government databases. "Stand by," the dispatcher said. "There may be a short delay." Ethan acknowledged the message and looked back at Dr. Marcus Bennett with the quiet confidence of someone who believed patience was always the safest choice. Marcus remained standing exactly where he had been asked, making no attempt to argue or leave. The only sign of growing concern was the way his eyes briefly drifted toward the hospital entrance each time the automatic doors opened. Inside St. Matthew Regional Medical Center, the atmosphere had changed. Members of the surgical team gathered around the operating room, exchanging increasingly worried glances. A circulating nurse checked the clock again before quietly asking whether there had been any word from Dr. Bennett. The chief anesthesiologist looked toward the hallway and answered with a slow shake of his head. Everything else was ready. The instruments had been arranged with precision. The monitors displayed steady readings. The patient remained under careful observation while everyone waited for the one person responsible for leading the operation. Outside, another hospital administrator approached the entrance before recognizing Marcus immediately. He started toward the officer with obvious urgency, but Marcus gently raised one hand and offered a small, reassuring smile. It was a silent request to remain calm and allow the situation to unfold peacefully. The administrator stopped, respecting the doctor's judgment even while concern filled his face. Ethan noticed the exchange. "They seem eager to get you inside," he said. Marcus answered quietly. "They are not waiting for me as a person. They are waiting because someone entrusted their life to our team today." Ethan studied him for another moment. The calmness unsettled him more than anger would have. Most people became defensive when questioned. Most people demanded immediate explanations. Marcus did neither. His voice never rose. His posture never changed. His respect never disappeared, even as valuable minutes slipped away. "You are remarkably patient," Ethan observed. Marcus gave a thoughtful nod. "Years in medicine teach you something important. Panic rarely improves the outcome." Another minute passed. A young resident physician hurried through the entrance carrying a tablet computer. He stopped several yards away and spoke carefully. "Dr. Bennett, the patient's family has arrived. They keep asking when the surgery will begin." Marcus lowered his eyes for a brief second before looking back at the resident. "Please tell them we are doing everything possible. Tell them I will be there as soon as I am allowed." The resident hesitated, clearly wanting to say more, but simply nodded before returning inside. Ethan watched him leave, then looked again at Marcus. "You seem very certain that this surgery cannot proceed without you." Marcus answered with complete humility. "Every hospital has extraordinary physicians. I am fortunate to work beside many of them. But today this particular operation was planned around my specialty. Replacing the lead surgeon at the last minute is never simple." The words carried no pride, only responsibility. The hospital clock advanced once again, each passing minute becoming heavier than the last. Families continued arriving at the emergency entrance without noticing the quiet conversation unfolding on the sidewalk. Ambulances continued delivering patients. Nurses continued running between departments. The hospital never stopped moving. Yet for one operating room, time seemed suspended, held in place by a misunderstanding that neither man could yet see would soon become far more personal than either of them imagined. Officer Ethan Walker was about to request another update from dispatch when his personal cell phone began vibrating inside his uniform pocket. He almost ignored it, assuming it could wait until his shift slowed down, but the screen displayed his wife Emily's name. She rarely called while he was working unless something was truly important. Ethan answered immediately. Before he could finish saying hello, he heard panic in her voice unlike anything he had ever experienced. "Ethan, it is Jacob. He collapsed during soccer practice. The ambulance just brought him to St. Matthew." For a brief moment, the sounds of the busy hospital entrance seemed to disappear. "What happened?" Ethan asked, his voice suddenly unsteady. Emily struggled to catch her breath. "The emergency doctors think it is his heart. They are running tests, but they said he may need surgery right away. They told me to get here as fast as possible." Ethan looked instinctively toward the emergency entrance only a few yards away. His heartbeat quickened as the reality settled in. His 12-year-old son was already somewhere inside the same building. "I am coming," he said quietly before ending the call. He turned toward Marcus, his professional confidence suddenly replaced by visible uncertainty. For the first time that morning, his attention was divided between duty and family. At almost the same moment, the radio on Ethan's shoulder came alive again. The dispatcher informed him that the identification records had finally been confirmed. "Dr. Marcus Bennett is verified. Licensed physician, cardiovascular surgeon, credentials active." Ethan listened without speaking. The confirmation arrived only seconds after the desperate phone call from his wife. Before he could respond, the hospital administrator hurried back outside with an expression that reflected growing urgency. This time he spoke directly, unable to remain silent any longer. "Dr. Bennett, operating room 3 is ready. The patient cannot wait any longer." Marcus looked toward Ethan instead of toward the administrator. There was no anger in his face, no satisfaction, only concern for the people depending on him. Ethan slowly handed back the identification cards that had remained in his possession. "Dr. Bennett," he said, "your identification has been confirmed." Marcus accepted the cards with calm gratitude, carefully placing them back into the pocket of his white coat. He noticed the change in Ethan's expression immediately. "Officer, is everything all right?" Ethan hesitated before answering. "My son was just brought into this hospital." Marcus's expression softened. "I am very sorry to hear that. I hope he receives excellent care." Ethan nodded silently, unable to explain the fear beginning to overwhelm him. Marcus glanced once toward the emergency entrance, then back at Ethan. Every family walking through those doors is hoping for the same thing today. They simply want someone they trust to help the person they love. Ethan stepped aside without another word. Marcus offered a respectful nod before walking quickly through the automatic doors, where members of the surgical team immediately surrounded him and disappeared down the hallway toward the operating suites. Ethan remained outside for only a few more seconds, staring through the glass entrance as doctors, nurses, and emergency staff hurried with quiet purpose. Then he took a deep breath and rushed inside, no longer as an officer supervising the entrance, but as a frightened father searching for his son, unaware that the next conversation he would hear inside those walls would connect his family's future to the very physician he had delayed only minutes before. Inside the emergency department, Officer Ethan Walker found his wife standing beside a treatment room with tears in her eyes but determination on her face. Emily immediately embraced him before pointing toward the closed doors where doctors were examining their son. "They believe it is a serious heart condition," she whispered. "The emergency physician said he needs surgery as soon as possible." Ethan looked through the narrow window in the door and caught a brief glimpse of 12-year-old Jacob lying quietly beneath warm blankets, while nurses moved efficiently around him. A pediatric cardiologist stepped into the hallway carrying a clipboard and introduced himself. "Officer Walker, your son is stable at the moment, but his condition requires immediate surgical intervention. We have already contacted our cardiovascular surgery team." Ethan nodded repeatedly. "Please do whatever you need to do, whatever it takes." The physician offered a reassuring smile before glancing toward another member of the medical staff approaching quickly from the operating suite. The two doctors exchanged a few quiet words, and Ethan noticed their expressions change almost instantly. "Is something wrong?" he asked. The pediatric cardiologist answered honestly. "Our lead cardiovascular surgeon has just arrived, but the operating schedule has already been delayed this morning. He is preparing for another emergency procedure that could not safely begin without him. We are coordinating both cases as quickly as possible." Ethan felt a strange sense of familiarity. Who is the surgeon? The physician looked directly at him. "Dr. Marcus Bennett." The hallway became completely silent in Ethan's mind. Only minutes earlier, he had kept that same doctor standing outside the hospital while valuable. Time slipped away. He remembered every calm word Marcus had spoken, every request to move quickly, every reminder that someone inside the building was waiting. Ethan slowly lowered his eyes as understanding settled over him with painful clarity. The physician continued speaking, unaware of the connection. "Dr. Bennett is one of the most experienced cardiovascular surgeons in the region. He has successfully handled many of our most difficult cases. Right now, he is evaluating how to save 2 lives that both require immediate attention." Ethan struggled to answer. "The doctor, he was delayed coming into the hospital." The physician nodded. "Yes, we heard there was an unexpected situation outside. Even so, he never complained when he arrived. He walked straight into the operating area and immediately began reviewing both patients." Emily looked at her husband with quiet confusion. "Do you know Dr. Bennett?" Ethan could not bring himself to answer immediately. He simply stared toward the operating wing where Marcus had disappeared only moments before. The memory of the surgeon's calm voice echoed in his thoughts. Every family walking through those doors is hoping for the same thing today. They simply want someone they trust to help the person they love. Ethan finally spoke so quietly that only Emily could hear him. "I was the reason he arrived late." Emily searched his face, realizing there was far more to the story than he had said. Before she could ask another question, the operating room coordinator approached them with measured urgency. "Officer Walker, Dr. Bennett has reviewed your son's case. He is finishing preparations for another critical surgery first, and immediately afterward, he intends to perform Jacob's operation himself." Ethan closed his eyes for a brief moment, overwhelmed not by anger or fear, but by the realization that the man he had doubted without cause was now choosing to spend the next several hours fighting to save the life of his child. Officer Ethan Walker remained seated beside his wife in the quiet family waiting area, but neither of them noticed the passing time anymore. Every few minutes, someone wearing blue surgical scrubs crossed the hallway. Every set of footsteps caused hopeful eyes to rise, and every opening elevator door made anxious families look up expecting news. Ethan had spent years believing that preparation gave people control over difficult moments. Sitting outside the operating suites taught him something entirely different. There were moments in life when the only thing left to do was trust another human being. Through the glass windows leading toward the surgical corridor, he caught a brief glimpse of Dr. Marcus Bennett walking with the operating room team. The surgeon had already changed into surgical attire, his white coat replaced by a sterile gown and surgical cap. Even from a distance, his movements reflected calm purpose rather than urgency. A circulating nurse reviewed patient information while Marcus listened carefully, asked several focused questions, and nodded before continuing toward the operating rooms. There was no sign that he carried resentment from what had happened outside the hospital only a short time earlier. There was only complete attention to the responsibilities waiting behind the operating room doors. Ethan lowered his head. He could have asked someone else to take Jacob's case, he whispered. Emily looked at him quietly, but he did not. Ethan shook his head slowly. After everything I put him through this morning, he is still choosing to help our family. Emily reached for his hand. Maybe that is exactly what makes him the doctor everyone trusts. Those words stayed with Ethan. He remembered Marcus standing patiently on the sidewalk despite every lost minute. He remembered the surgeon asking others to remain calm instead of arguing on his behalf. Most of all, he remembered the sentence that had seemed so ordinary at the time. Every family walking through those doors is hoping for the same thing today. Now Ethan understood those words in a way he never could have, while wearing only the perspective of an officer. He was no longer thinking about identification cards, procedures, or routine verification. He was thinking like every parent sitting in that hallway, hoping the next doctor to appear would carry good news. A nurse approached the waiting area with a reassuring smile. Dr. Bennett asked me to let you know that the first operation has begun successfully, she said. As soon as it is completed, he will personally meet with your family before beginning Jacob's surgery. Ethan stood immediately. He asked you to tell us that? The nurse nodded. He wanted you to know that your son has not been forgotten. After she walked away, Ethan remained standing in silence. That simple act of consideration affected him more deeply than he expected. Marcus had every reason to focus only on medicine, yet he had also remembered the frightened parents waiting outside. Ethan realized that true professionalism was not measured only by skill. It was measured by compassion shown when no one would blame you for withholding it. Minutes later, the doors leading toward the operating suites opened briefly as Marcus walked past with another member of the surgical team. Their eyes met for only a second across the hallway. Ethan instinctively stepped forward. Dr. Bennett, he called softly. Marcus paused. Ethan struggled to find the right words. I owe you an apology. Marcus looked at him with the same calm expression he had worn all morning. Officer Walker, he replied gently. Right now the most important conversation is the one I am about to have with your son's heart. We can talk about everything else later. With that, he offered a respectful nod and continued toward the operating room, leaving Ethan standing in complete silence, realizing that the greatest lesson of his career had not come from another police officer, but from a physician who had chosen compassion over pride when he had every reason to do the opposite. The waiting room settled into a silence that felt heavier than any conversation. A television mounted high on the wall continued playing the morning news without sound. Coffee grew cold on untouched tables, and families sat together, holding hope as tightly as they held one another's hands. Officer Ethan Walker had spent countless hours waiting for reports throughout his career, but nothing compared to waiting for news about his own child. Every minute stretched longer than the one before it. He looked repeatedly toward the double doors leading into the surgical wing, knowing that somewhere beyond them, Dr. Marcus Bennett was carrying responsibilities that reached far beyond medical skill. The first operation continued while another team quietly prepared everything needed for Jacob's procedure. Nurses moved in and out of supply rooms with practiced efficiency, technicians checked equipment one final time, and members of the pediatric surgical staff reviewed every detail with careful precision. There was no rushing despite the urgency. Everything inside the hospital reflected one simple truth that Marcus understood better than anyone. The fastest operation was never the safest one. Excellence demanded preparation, discipline, and complete focus. Nearly 2 hours later, the operating room doors opened. Marcus stepped into the hallway, removed his surgical mask, and walked directly toward the family of the first patient waiting nearby. His shoulders showed the quiet weight of long hours, but his voice remained calm and steady. After speaking privately with them, relief spread across their faces, followed by grateful tears and heartfelt embraces. Ethan watched from across the corridor, realizing that another family had just received the news they had been praying for. Marcus accepted their thanks with humility before turning toward the pediatric operating suite without pausing to rest. A nurse approached him with Jacob's medical file already open. Marcus reviewed every page one more time, asking thoughtful questions about laboratory results, imaging studies, medications, and recent observations from the emergency physicians. He listened carefully to every answer before signing the final surgical authorization. Nothing about his preparation suggested distraction or fatigue. It was as though the difficult morning outside the hospital had never happened. Ethan stood and slowly walked closer. This time Marcus noticed him before entering the next operating room. Their eyes met again. Ethan spoke quietly, almost afraid to interrupt. "Dr. Bennett, before you go in, I only want to say one thing. Please know that I am deeply sorry." Marcus looked at him for several seconds before answering with gentle honesty. "Officer Walker, your apology matters because it is sincere. But right now your son needs my full attention more than either of us needs this conversation." Ethan nodded, unable to hide the emotion in his voice. "Please bring him back to us." Marcus offered a reassuring smile that reached beyond words. "That has been my plan from the moment I read his chart." He then turned toward Emily. "Your son is strong. My entire team is ready. We will treat him exactly as we would treat someone from our own family." Emily whispered a grateful thank you through tears. Marcus gave one final nod before disappearing through the operating room doors as they closed quietly behind him. A red indicator light illuminated above the entrance, signaling that the procedure had begun. Ethan remained standing in the empty hallway long after the doors had closed, staring at them with folded hands instead of folded arms. Earlier that morning, he had seen Marcus only as someone to question. Now he saw him as the one person carrying the hopes of his entire family. In that silent corridor, surrounded by strangers united by love for someone waiting behind hospital doors, Ethan finally understood that real authority was never measured by the power to stop another person. It was measured by the willingness to use extraordinary skill in service of complete strangers, even when those strangers had not treated you with the trust and respect you deserved. Hours seemed to lose their meaning inside St. Matthew Regional Medical Center. The red light above the operating room remained illuminated while the quiet rhythm of the hospital continued around it. Nurses changed shifts, volunteers guided visitors through unfamiliar hallways, and physicians moved from one patient to another with calm determination. Yet for Ethan Walker and Emily, the world had narrowed to a single set of doors and the hope that they would eventually open with good news. Ethan sat with his hands clasped together, replaying the morning over and over in his mind. He could still picture Dr. Marcus Bennett standing outside the hospital entrance with complete patience, asking only for enough trust to reach someone who needed him. The memory felt painfully different now because Ethan understood what he had failed to see. Every minute he had delayed the surgeon had represented a family waiting inside with fear in their hearts. Now he was one of those family members. Nearly 3 hours after Jacob's operation began, the red light above the operating room quietly turned off. A few moments later the doors opened, and Dr. Marcus Bennett stepped into the hallway. He looked tired, the kind of exhaustion earned through complete concentration, yet his eyes carried quiet reassurance before he spoke a single word. Ethan and Emily stood immediately. Neither of them could find the courage to ask the question. Marcus smiled gently. Jacob's surgery went very well. Emily covered her face as tears of relief began flowing immediately. Ethan closed his eyes for a brief moment, taking the deepest breath he had taken all day. Marcus continued speaking with calm precision. His heart responded exactly as we hoped. The repair was successful, and he is already being transferred to the pediatric intensive care unit, where our team will continue monitoring him closely. He has a strong recovery ahead of him, but today he has every reason to look forward to that recovery. Emily reached forward and embraced Marcus before quietly apologizing for her emotion. The doctor simply smiled with kindness. "You never have to apologize for loving your child." Ethan remained standing in front of Marcus, searching for words that seemed completely inadequate. Finally he spoke. "Dr. Bennett, you saved my son's life after I made your job harder before you even entered this building. I cannot explain how deeply sorry I am." Marcus looked at him thoughtfully before answering. "Officer Walker, Everyone carries responsibilities that shape the decisions they make. This morning you believed you were protecting people. This afternoon I was trying to save them. Neither responsibility should exist without respect for the other. Ethan lowered his head. I should have listened. Marcus nodded gently. Listening often takes less time than assuming. The words were spoken without anger, accusation, or satisfaction. They carried only quiet truth. A nurse approached with permission for Jacob's parents to visit him briefly in recovery. Before leaving, Ethan extended his hand. Marcus accepted it without hesitation. The handshake lasted only a few seconds, but it carried far more meaning than the brief encounter outside the hospital entrance that morning. This time there was no suspicion between them, no misunderstanding, and no barrier created by appearance or assumption. There were only two fathers in different ways. One who had spent the day saving lives, and another who had just learned how easily trust could be lost, and how powerfully it could be restored through compassion. As Marcus turned to continue caring for his next patient without asking for recognition, Ethan watched him disappear down the corridor with a feeling he knew would remain long after his son recovered. Respect had arrived quietly, but it had arrived at exactly the right moment. Several weeks later, the first signs of autumn had begun to appear across the city as sunlight filtered through trees surrounding St. Matthew Regional Medical Center. Jacob Walker returned for a routine follow-up appointment, carrying far more energy than anyone had seen on the day he arrived through the emergency entrance. His smile came easily now, and although he still moved carefully under his parents' watchful eyes, every step reflected the remarkable progress of his recovery. Dr. Marcus Bennett greeted the family with the same quiet warmth he offered every patient. He reviewed Jacob's latest test results, listened carefully to his heartbeat, and smiled with genuine satisfaction. Everything is healing exactly as we hoped, he said. Keep following the recovery plan, and there is every reason to expect a healthy future. Jacob looked up with admiration. Thank you for fixing my heart, Dr. Bennett. Marcus smiled gently. Your heart was always strong. We simply helped it do what it was meant to do. As the appointment ended, Ethan remained standing after Emily and Jacob stepped into the hallway. There was one conversation he still needed to finish. Dr. Bennett. He began quietly. I have thought about that morning every single day. Marcus listened without interrupting. Ethan continued. I cannot change what happened outside this hospital, but I can decide what kind of officer I become because of it. He explained that he had requested additional community engagement training, encouraged respectful communication during every traffic stop and public encounter, and begun speaking with younger officers about the danger of allowing assumptions to replace careful judgment. He admitted that authority carried enormous responsibility because one unnecessary decision could affect lives in ways that remained invisible at the time. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Growth begins the moment someone chooses honesty over pride. Ethan looked directly at him. You had every reason to remember me as the officer who stood in your way. Instead, you chose to remember that my son needed help. Marcus answered with calm conviction. If I had carried resentment into the operating room, your son would have paid the price for something he never did. Justice does not ask innocent people to carry another person's mistakes. Those words stayed with Ethan long after the appointment ended. Outside the hospital entrance, he paused in exactly the same place where he had stopped Marcus weeks earlier. The sidewalk looked ordinary. Patients entered. Visitors carried flowers. Ambulances arrived and departed with steady purpose. Nothing about the place suggested that two lives had changed there forever. Yet Ethan knew that he would never stand on that sidewalk in quite the same way again. From that day forward, every time he approached another citizen, he reminded himself that every person carried a story he could not immediately see, a family waiting somewhere, and a purpose that deserved the chance to be understood before being questioned. Months later, people around the community quietly noticed something different about Officer Ethan Walker. They noticed that he listened longer before speaking, asked questions before making conclusions, and treated strangers with the same respect he hoped someone would show his own family. Few of them knew why he had changed. Dr. Marcus Bennett never told the story. He never sought recognition, public praise, or acknowledgement for the choice he had made inside the operating room. He simply continued walking through the hospital each morning with the same steady purpose, believing that compassion remained strongest when it expected nothing in return. Sometimes justice does not arrive with raised voices, punishment, or public victory. Sometimes justice arrives when one person's dignity quietly transforms another person's character. The badge gave Ethan authority, but Marcus reminded him what that authority was meant to protect. And on the day one father trusted another with the life of his son, they both discovered that the strongest heart in the room was not measured by power, but by the courage to choose compassion when resentment would have been easier.